something we touched upon a bit, but I don't think probed as far as we probably should under current circumstances. And that's the maritime territorial issues, the East China Sea and the South China Sea, was a significant part of President Ma's address, of course. And he offered the East China Sea Peace Initiative last August and suggested that the principles could extend to the South China Sea as well a couple of months later. At some level, it's a fairly familiar list, one that one could find elements of in U.S. policy toward the region and mainland policy toward the region. Ma's specific list, which includes refraining from hostile or antagonistic activities, putting aside differences and keeping dialogue going, of following international law and pursuing peaceful means, seeking a code of conduct for operations and development in the area, and pursuing cooperative approaches to development. That said, though, it's in some ways been a controversial undertaking because it has, of course, been entangled with the Japanese nationalization of the Senkaku, Diaoyuan, Diaoyuan, those landforms in East China Sea. You can't even speak without hearing it take a side. So I think we've had a very complex alignment of partial parallels and partial contradictions, as it were, among all concerned parties, Taiwan, China, and the U.S., as well as Japan, of course. So, June, I know you've worked a lot on the East China Sea issues. What's your sense of how this all plays out? Does the East China Sea Peace Initiative look like a promising approach to this? What are the consequences of President Ma pursuing that in terms of relations with the other principal players?
Well, I think, first of all, that this is a real coup on his part to have achieved this agreement. And
the fisheries agreement.
The fisheries agreement with Japan. And this by Ma, for, I guess most of you know this, that Ma had a reputation for being anti-Japanese. And
never let anyone read your doctoral dissertation.
So the fact that he perhaps of all people was able to achieve this is a real, I don't know, feather in his cap is such an antiquated expression, but who has feathers in their cap and when did that start kind of thing. But anyhow, that was no doubt that was an achievement. And I know that this speech with Stanford was planned a long time ago, but how nice for him that it came along just 6 days before he was to make this speech. So now he is holding this forth as a beacon, if you will, for other countries to negotiate the same way. But I don't think it has too much hope of working with Japan and China, the other major claimant to those islands, because I have actually watched these negotiations going on between China and Japan for years and years and years. And I believe it was 2007 that they finally reached an agreement. The media just went wild. It's a solution, blah, blah, blah. This is wonderful. And then the agreement very carefully said is, we will leave the details to be worked out later. And what happened is they couldn't work out the details, and they've been at each other's throats ever since. And that's only the latest of these efforts. So I would say there's probably many pitfalls ahead. And there's a lot of history here between, for example, the Vietnamese and the Chinese. The seizure of the paracels in 74, 75 by the Chinese, just as the North Vietnamese were about to take over from South Vietnam and get those islands themselves. Years and years of history, streets that, when Ho Chi Minh took over North Vietnam, they renamed all the streets proper things like Liberation Street and that sort of thing. The only street they didn't rename was a street named after the two sisters who led the effort to kick the Chinese out hundreds of years before. That means something. The changing of the Saigon's name to Ho Chi Minh City, nobody got that who doesn't know Chinese. What Saigon meant, it's Qigong, Western tribute. Yeah, they weren't going to have that anymore. Saigon was a tributary of China. And so this goes way back with both the Philippines and the Japanese. The Philippines, I think, are just going to give in because they always do.
The Navy's down to 2 leaky rowboats and a raft. So.
Yeah.
Sorry, Philippines.
Yeah. I think the other agreements are going to be much harder to get. I can only praise Ma for the agreement he did get, and very carefully saying that this does not affect either side's claims to sovereignty, although it might be added that the Taiwan boats will respect Taiwan's 12-mile limit there. So in a way, that might impinge, but still, I mean, coup for him, but not probably going to work very well for others.
May I add something?
Sure, go ahead.
I think the East China Peace initiative mentioned by President Ma should be extended to South China Sea too.
He's proposed that idea.
Because South China Sea is more complicated. Over Parasols, Vietnam and China fought 2 wars, and there are 7 parties, including China and Taiwan and so on, claiming strategies. So now the
But not all of these countries.
well,
That
yes,
different countries claim
different
pieces.
parts.
China claimed, the Chinese claim was virtually everything.
Only
The
China
entire-
claims all the Spratlys, but there are other
The
claims.
entire South China Sea. Now, the fishery agreement reached by President Ma with the Japanese, I think that can set as an example. So that means we dispense with the sovereignty issue, and let's talk about business. And that, I think, can be used in settling disputes in South China Sea too. And in fact, after fighting 2 wars on the Parasols, 1975 and 88, China and Vietnam did reach an agreement, and this is not known outside. And I know it because I heard it from someone in the Chinese Foreign Ministry. They did sign an agreement in 1993, dispensing their sovereignty claims and agreeing to collaboratively exploit resources in Parasols, whatever they are. And so I think that formula can be used in settling other disputes too, including the East China dispute.
Yeah, on this issue, I'd just say a couple of things. So one is, much as I like to defend the tribe of which both President Ma and I are members, that is international lawyers, this strikes me as an area where international law is singularly unhelpful. Where you've got these uninhabitable rocks and islands, effectively, at all sides, the ROC, the PRC, the other 4 or 5 claimants in the South China Sea and Japan, where you've got into a situation where no one can effectively control those in the ordinary way. You can't really govern them, you can't really put people on them. What you've got as a game is where everyone needs to assert control or push back against others, asserting the minimal control you have in these islands. So you have this invitation, almost, or this pressure to send some hapless guy with wet boots and a flag out there, or to send out the fishing trawlers, and behind them the white-hulled Coast Guard ships, and behind them the gray-hulled Navy ships, because if you don't, the other guy's going to claim it. And so there is this risk of escalation, this tendency to do tit for tat, to protect the sovereignty claim, even as you negotiate about other undertakings. So I think we're in for long-term, low-grade friction, and therefore with that, the potential that some accident will occur that will escalate. That has just built into the way these things work, because all the really valuable stuff, the sea lanes around the rocks, the hydrocarbons that may be under the waters off of them, those all hang off the question of who owns the landform and how much the landform is account for. So I think we're going to see a lot of
But the PRC is in a much better position than any of the other claimants to actually
it's got the biggest
occupy and enforce. And the founding of Samsha in June is an important
You
step.
do what you can, and the most significant worrisome signs in terms of maintaining stability on these issues, it seems to me, and one of the things that makes something like the peace initiative that President Ma talks about, an important alternate route to dealing with some of these problems, is that we have not recently seen major changes in the status quo of control. When the Chinese took the parasols, that was a big change. But beyond that, it's been fairly stable. There have been little skirmishes. They built the occasional structure on this degree and so on. But only in the last several months are there things that look potentially really changing the control. One is the net across the mouth of Scarborough Reef on the island, which really makes that a PRC control area. And another is what may turn out to be a shift in effective control of the area around the Senkaku Diaoyu pattern, with China insisting that Japan needs to understand the world has changed. Those are status quo altering undertakings, and I think in those circumstances, finding some way of changing the subject from pushing on the sovereignty issue is particularly important. And whether it's President Ma's East China Sea Peace Initiative or some other way of getting out of this game, which now seems to be played in a way that can change status quo, is important. I just want to say a couple other things on this, and then get to our last question before we turn to the audience. I would say that one of the interesting things about the East China Sea Peace Initiative and the proposal that it might be extended to the South China Sea context is that I would say this serves Taiwan's interests, especially Taiwan's interests with the United States, in one important way. There had been a tendency in not just the popular accounts, but I think even in serious thinking about these issues, to say repeatedly that the ROC claims and the PRC claims are essentially the same. That is, there's not much daylight between Beijing and Taipei on how to handle these things. I think we're starting to see some of that daylight. And I think, although the claims of sovereignty look rather similar if you draw the maps, what you've got is a PRC position which seems increasingly to challenge the status quo of current control in some areas. And that this says, yes, set aside, let's talk about cooperation. But the ROC position has taken more of the emphasis on cooperation, joint development, which used to be more central to the PRC approach. Think the agreement with Japan about the Xinjiang field, which fell apart. So there may be an emerging